Imagine walking past someone every day, someone society has labeled as invisible, only to discover they hold the key to your heart's deepest desires. That's what happened to Eliza Harrington, a tech billionaire who believed she had everything until she met a man who had seemingly nothing. But in life, appearances can be deceiving. And sometimes the universe has a peculiar sense of humor when it comes to teaching us its most valuable lessons. Before we dive in, if this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly inspirational stories. Now, let's begin this journey together. Eliza Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, gazing down at the city that had made her fortune. At 35, she was the founder and CEO of Harrington Tech Solutions, a company valued at over $12 billion. Her sleek black hair was pulled back in her signature tight bun, not a strand out of place, just like her life. Ms. Harrington, the board is waiting. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Tell them I'll be there in 5, Eliza replied, straightening her tailored suit. She had built her empire from scratch, transforming a small startup into one of the most influential tech companies in the world. Her face graced magazine covers, her name appeared on most powerful lists, and her wealth continued to grow exponentially. Yet lately, something felt empty. That morning, as her chauffeur drove her to a charity event, Eliza found herself staring out the window at the city streets. Her gaze drifted to a small park where a group of homeless people had gathered. One man stood out tall with unruly hair and a scruffy beard, yet there was something dignified about the way he carried himself as he distributed coffee cups to others. Stop the car, she commanded suddenly. Ms. Harrington, just for a moment. For reasons she couldn't explain, Eliza watched this stranger, feeling an unexpected pull. There was something in his eyes, a kindness, an intelligence that seemed at odds with his circumstances. Little did she know that the man she was observing was Michael Reeves, and things weren't exactly as they appeared. Michael had his own corner office in a skyscraper just 10 blocks away, not that anyone would believe it looking at him now. As CEO of Reeves Enterprises, he controlled a business empire worth billions. But 3 weeks ago, he had started a social experiment that would change his life forever. Tired of relationships based on his wealth and status, Michael had decided to go undercover as a homeless man. He wanted to experience life stripped of privilege, to find connections based on humanity rather than net worth. Neither Eliza nor Michael could have predicted how their paths would cross, or how deeply their lives would become intertwined in the days to come. Eliza couldn't explain why she returned to the park the next day. She told herself it was to scout locations for her foundation's next community project, but her eyes searched for the man she had seen yesterday. Looking for someone, the voice came from behind her, causing her to spin around. There he was, the same unruly hair and beard, but up close, his eyes were startlingly blue against his weathered face. I know, I'm just. Eliza rarely fumbled for words, but something about this encounter threw her off balance. I'm Michael, he said, extending a hand. She hesitated only briefly before taking it. Eliza. Just Eliza? No last name, he asked with a knowing smile. For now, yes, she replied, surprised by her own desire for anonymity. Do you spend a lot of time here? Michael gestured to a bench. Mind if we sit? And to answer your question, I've been here about 3 weeks. As they sat, Eliza noticed his hands clean, with neatly trimmed nails. Not what she expected. You're not what you seem, she said before she could stop herself. Michael's laugh was warm, genuine. I could say the same about you. Not many people in designer suits come to sit with the homeless. For the next hour, they talked. Eliza found herself sharing things she rarely discussed: her childhood dreams, her parents' early struggle with poverty, her frustrations with the superficiality of her social circle. Michael listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that made her feel truly heard. What about you? She finally asked. How did you end up here? Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say I'm on a journey to find something authentic in a world that often values the wrong things. Before they parted, Eliza impulsively asked, would you have coffee with me tomorrow? Not here, there's a small cafe around the corner. Just coffee, Michael asked, his eyes twinkling. Just coffee, she confirmed, feeling strangely nervous. Then I accept. Back in her office, Eliza couldn't focus on her meetings. Her CFO presented quarterly reports while her mind wandered to blue eyes and philosophical conversations. "Eliza, did you hear me?" her friend and Jasmine asked after the meeting. "Sorry, I was distracted." "Clearly. What's going on with you?" Eliza hesitated. "I met someone." Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. "You mean like a man? An actual human being who broke through the Ice Queen exterior?" "Don't be dramatic," Eliza said, rolling her eyes. "He's different." "Different how? Wait, is he good enough for you? What does he do?" The question gave Eliza pause. "He's currently between jobs," she said carefully. Meanwhile, Michael returned to his temporary shelter, a small room at a homeless mission where he volunteered. He checked his secure phone, seeing dozens of messages from his executive team. His assistant, James, had texted bored, getting antsy about your sabbatical, how much longer? Michael texted back, tell them 2 more weeks. I'm onto something important. That night, both Eliza and Michael lay awake, thinking about their encounter. Both accustomed to walls built by wealth and position, they had unexpectedly found someone who seemed to see past the surface. The next day at the cafe, Michael arrived early, deliberately dressed in his cleanest but still worn clothes. He watched Eliza enter, her elegant figure drawing attention despite her attempt at casual dress. "You look nice," he said as she sat down. "This old thing," she laughed, gesturing to what was actually a casual outfit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I meant your smile," Michael replied. Eliza blushed, an unfamiliar sensation. "I ordered us some pastries. I hope that's okay." "Perfect. Though I should warn you, I can't exactly reciprocate this kind of treatment." "That's not why I'm here," she said softly. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Eliza would meet Michael at the cafe or the park, each time staying longer, talking more deeply. She found herself looking forward to these meetings more than any board discussion or gala dinner. Michael, too, was becoming increasingly invested. His experiment had taken an unexpected turn. He had sought authenticity and found it in the most ironic way with a woman who had no idea who he really was. "My board would have a collective heart attack if they knew I was spending my afternoons feeding ducks instead of reviewing acquisition proposals," Eliza said one day as they tossed breadcrumbs into the pond. Michael chuckled. "I can imagine." "Can you?" she asked, suddenly curious. "What did you do before this?" She gestured vaguely to his situation. Michael's smile faltered slightly. "I was in business. Corporate world." "What happened?" The usual story wanted more meaning, less politics. Decided to step away for a while. It wasn't exactly a lie, but the omission weighed on him. Each day the deception became harder to maintain, especially as he recognized the irony. He had gone undercover to find someone who would love him regardless of wealth, and had fallen for someone who had no idea they were economic equals. One evening, as Eliza walked Michael back toward the shelter, they passed a restaurant where a boisterous corporate party was spilling onto the sidewalk. "Eliza?" "Eliza Harrington," a loud voice called. Eliza froze, recognizing Victor Chen, a venture capitalist she sometimes worked with. "My God, it is you. What are you doing in this neighborhood? And who's your friend?" Victor's gaze swept over Michael with poorly disguised disdain. "Victor, this is Michael." "Michael, Victor Chen." Michael extended his hand. "Nice to meet you." Victor hesitated before briefly touching Michael's hand. "Likewise. Eliza, we miss you at the investors' circle. Too busy making billions to join us." "Something like that," she replied coolly. As they walked away, Michael noticed Eliza's discomfort. "Embarrassed to be seen with me?" "No," she replied too quickly. Then, more honestly, maybe a little uncomfortable with the assumptions people make. "But you slumming it with someone like me about anything in my life? I'm tired of being Eliza Harrington, tech billionaire, instead of just Eliza." Michael fell silent, the word billionaire echoing in his mind. He had known she was successful, but hadn't realized the extent of her wealth. The irony deepened. 2 billionaires, one pretending to be homeless, one wishing she could escape her fortune, both seeking the same thing, genuine connection. As weeks passed, Eliza found herself opening up more than she had with anyone in years. One afternoon, as they shared a simple picnic in the park, food she had brought from an expensive delicatessen but pretended came from a local grocery store, she confessed her deepest frustration. Everyone wants something from me. A job, an investment, a connection, publicity. It's exhausting never knowing if someone likes you for yourself or what you can do for them. Michael nodded, understanding all too well. That's why authenticity is so rare at certain levels of success. Exactly. Wait, Eliza turned to him. How would you know that? Michael stiffened momentarily. I observe people, and I wasn't always here. He gestured to his worn clothes. Eliza studied him thoughtfully. You know, sometimes you say things that make me wonder about you. Good, he said with a mysterious smile. Wonder is underrated in relationships. The word relationships hung between them. Neither had defined what was happening, but both felt it growing deeper each day. That evening, as they walked along the river, their hands brushed. Eliza felt an electric jolt, and gathering her courage, she laced her fingers through his. Michael squeezed gently, and they continued in comfortable silence, the city lights reflecting on the water. Michael, she said finally, stopping to face him, I need to tell you something. His heart raced. Had she discovered who he was? I'm developing feelings for you, she admitted, and it scares me because our lives are so different. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by guilt. Eliza. No, let me finish. I've never been with someone who makes me feel so seen. But I'm not naive. I know my wealth creates complications. Michael took a deep breath. Your wealth doesn't matter to me. It should, she insisted. It affects everything. And there's something else. My company is launching a major urban housing initiative. We're converting properties into affordable housing, and I want to help you. I could get you an apartment, a job at one of our subsidiaries. Michael stepped back, dropping her hand. This was precisely what he had hoped to avoid, being seen as someone who needed saving. Is that what this has been about? Your charity project? His tone was sharper than intended. No, how can you think that? Because you've never asked what I might want or need. You've assumed. Eliza flinched. That's not fair. I care about you. Do you? Or do you care about how helping me makes you feel? The words hung between them like a wall. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. I think I should go. Michael instantly regretted his harshness. Eliza, wait. No, you're right. I made assumptions. I need some time. She turned and walked away, her slender figure disappearing into the city lights. Michael stood alone, knowing he had sabotaged something precious, partly because of his own deception. The next few days were miserable for both of them. Eliza threw herself into work, staying at the office until midnight. Michael wandered the city, his experiment feeling empty without her. On the third day, Jasmine confronted Eliza in her office. Okay, what's going on? You look terrible. Thanks, Eliza replied dryly. You know what I mean. Is this about that man? The one between jobs? Eliza sighed. His name is Michael, and yes. What happened? I offered to help him with housing and a job. He accused me of trying to make him a charity case. Jasmine sat down across from her. Were you? No, I care about him. But maybe there was a little savior complex mixed in there. Eliza was silent, considering. Maybe, she admitted. But that doesn't change my feelings. Then tell him that. Apologize. You, the great Eliza Harrington, actually saying sorry, it might shock him into forgiveness. Jasmine grinned. Meanwhile, Michael had returned to his actual apartment for the first time in weeks, shocking his household staff. He showered, shaved his beard, and sat in his home office staring at his phone. His assistant, James, knocked and entered. Welcome back to civilization, sir. Should I inform the board? Not yet, Michael said. I have unfinished business. Does this business involve the woman you've been seeing? The one your security detail has been quietly keeping tabs on? Michael's head snapped up. You've been having me followed. Only for safety, sir. Board's orders. And they're quite interested to know you've been spending time with Eliza Harrington. How do they know who she is? James raised an eyebrow. She's only one of the most recognizable tech CEOs in the country. Michael groaned. This complicated matters further. If his board knew, how long before the information leaked to the press? Billionaire CEO poses as homeless man, he could already see the headlines. Sir, if I may, whatever game you've been playing, it might be time to end it. MS. Harrington's company is actually on our acquisition radar for next quarter. Michael froze. What? The board added Harrington Tech to our potential acquisitions list while you were away. Their new AI security protocol is exactly what we need for the Nexus project. The implications hit Michael like a tsunami. Not only had he deceived Eliza about his identity, but his company was planning what could be perceived as a hostile takeover of hers, if she discovered both truths at once. Cancel any acquisition plans immediately, he ordered. But sir, the board has already. I don't care. Find another solution. After James left, Michael paced his office. He needed to come clean to Eliza, but how? Every scenario he imagined ended with her feeling betrayed and manipulated. Back in her penthouse that evening, Eliza made a decision. She would go to the park tomorrow, find Michael, and apologize. She would explain that her feelings were real, regardless of their different circumstances. What she didn't expect was to see Michael's face on her TV as she flipped through channels. And returning to business news, Reeves Enterprises CEO Michael Reeves made a rare public appearance today after a month-long absence, attending the Global Economic Summit, where he announced a major initiative for urban housing solutions. Eliza froze, remote in hand, staring at the screen. The clean-shaven, impeccably dressed man addressing reporters was unmistakably her Michael, except he wasn't homeless. He was a CEO. Like her. The phone rang. Jasmine. Are you seeing this? Her friend demanded without preamble. Isn't that your Michael? I don't understand, Eliza whispered. Well, I did some digging. Michael Reeves, CEO of Reeves Enterprises. Net worth estimated at $14 billion. Slightly more than you, by the way. Has a reputation for eccentric behavior. Disappeared from public view about a month ago, with his company citing a personal sabbatical. The room seemed to spin around Eliza. He lied to me. All this time. Looks like it. Question is why? Eliza's shock was quickly hardening into anger. I intend to find out. The next morning, Eliza had her driver take her to the Reeves Enterprises headquarters. She marched through the lobby, ignoring the receptionist's calls, and took the elevator to the executive floor. Michael's assistant stood as she approached. MS. Harrington. I don't believe you have an appointment. He'll see me, Eliza said coldly, pushing past him to throw open Michael's office door. Michael looked up from his desk, his face registering shock, then resignation. Eliza. Was any of it real? She demanded, her voice shaking. Or was I just some experiment to amuse a bored billionaire? Michael stood slowly. Eliza, please. Let me explain. Explain what? How you pretended to be homeless. How you let me share my deepest insecurities while hiding who you really are. How you made me feel guilty for offering help you didn't even need. I never meant to hurt you, he said quietly. Then, what did you mean to do? Michael gestured to a chair. Please sit. You deserve the full story. After a moment's hesitation, Eliza sat, her posture rigid with anger. 3 years ago, I was engaged, Michael began, to a woman who, it turned out, was more interested in my money and status than in me. When I discovered she was selling information about our company to competitors, I ended it. But it left me wondering if anyone could ever see past my wealth to the person beneath. Eliza remained silent, her expression unreadable. So I decided to try an experiment. Live without the trappings of wealth and privilege, see if I could make genuine connections. Then I met you and everything changed. I kept meaning to tell you the truth, but the longer I waited, the harder it became. You had so many opportunities, she said, her voice barely controlled. I know, and every time I chose the coward's way out because I was afraid of losing you. Well, congratulations. Your fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Eliza stood to leave. Eliza, please. What we shared was real. My feelings for you are real. She paused at the door. The irony is, I would have understood your experiment, I've spent years wishing I could do something similar, but I can't forgive the lies." As she left, Michael sank back into his chair, the full weight of his mistake crushing him. He had sought authenticity and instead created the most profound deception of his life. For 2 weeks, Eliza ignored Michael's calls, emails, and the increasingly elaborate flower arrangements delivered to her office. She threw herself into work, stayed late, and snapped at her staff until Jasmine finally intervened. "Okay, enough," her friend declared, closing Eliza's laptop mid-email. "You're miserable, your employees are terrified, and I'm tired of watching you punish yourself." "I'm not punishing myself," Eliza protested. "I'm working." "You're hiding. From your feelings and from a conversation you need to have." "He lied to me, Jasmine. For weeks." "Yes, he did, and it was wrong. But before you knew he was Michael Reeves, Billionaire CEO, who was he to you?" Eliza's anger faltered. He was kind, thoughtful, the only person who seemed to see me as just Eliza, not as a walking bank account or a business opportunity. Ironic, isn't it? You both wanted the same thing, to be seen for who you are, not what you own. That doesn't excuse the deception. "No, it doesn't," Jasmine agreed, "but it might explain it. And frankly, when are you going to find another billionaire with the same issues you have? It's a pretty exclusive dating pool." Despite herself, Eliza laughed. "I hate that you're making sense. I always make sense. It's why you pay me obscene amounts of money." Jasmine stood to leave. "Just think about it. People make mistakes, even billionaires." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept returning to the moments she and Michael had shared, the genuine conversations, the laughter, the feeling of finally being understood. Had it all been fabricated? Around midnight, she reached for her phone and typed out a text. "Why the park by my office? Of all the places in the city, why there?" 3 dots appeared immediately, as if he'd been waiting. "Because I read an article about you. It mentioned you secretly funded the renovation of that park last year without taking credit. I wanted to understand what kind of person would do that." Eliza stared at the response, remembering the project. She had grown up in that neighborhood, and the park had been her refuge as a child. When it fell into disrepair, she quietly arranged for its restoration, refusing the naming rights the city offered. Another text came through. "I never expected to meet you there. That was coincidence. Or fate." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "I don't want to do this over text." His voice came through, deep and familiar. "I owe you more than that." "You owe me the truth," she said quietly. "Yes, all of it. No more half-truths or omissions. Will you meet me?" "Where?" "The park. Tomorrow morning. Just us, no assistants, no security, no pretenses." Eliza considered. "Okay, but this doesn't mean I forgive you." "I understand." The next morning, Eliza dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. As she approached the park, she saw Michael already waiting on their usual bench, similarly dressed down, though she now recognized his casual clothes probably cost thousands. He stood as she approached. "Thank you for coming." "I'm here for answers, not reconciliation," she said, sitting beside him but maintaining distance. Michael nodded. "Fair enough. Where do you want me to start?" "From the beginning. And don't leave anything out." For the next hour, Michael told her everything about his failed engagement, his disillusionment with relationships built on wealth, his decision to live without his identity as a shield or a weapon. He explained how meeting her had changed everything, how his experiment had become complicated by genuine feelings. "The longer I knew you, the more impossible it seemed to tell you the truth. I was afraid you'd react exactly as you did, assume everything was a lie." "Wasn't it?" Eliza challenged. "No," he said firmly. "My name and my circumstances were false. Everything else, my thoughts, my feelings, my growing love for you, that was all real." Eliza's breath caught at the word love. "There's something else you should know," Michael continued. "My company had plans to acquire parts of your business. I shut it down the moment I learned about it, but I want everything on the table between us." "You were going to take over my company?" Eliza's anger flared anew. "No. The board was exploring options while I was away. I would never have approved it. especially after meeting you. But I want you to have all the facts." Eliza was silent for a long moment. "You know what the worst part was? Not the lies about your identity, but that you let me believe I had somehow offended you by offering help. You made me feel guilty for caring." Michael winced. "You're right, and I'm sorry. My pride got in the way. When you offered help, it reminded me that you saw me as someone who needed saving, not as an equal. I reacted badly. So where does this leave us?" "That's up to you," Michael said simply. "I've laid everything out. I care about you, Eliza, more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. But I understand if the deception is too much to overcome." Eliza stood and walked a few paces away, gathering her thoughts. The rational part of her brain said to walk away, to not trust this man who had lied so completely, but her heart remembered the connection they had shared, rare and precious in their isolated world of wealth and power. "I need time," she said finally. "I understand your reasons better now, but trust isn't rebuilt in a day." "Take all the time you need," Michael replied. "I'll be here." Over the following weeks, they began a cautious reconstruction. They met in public places, restaurants, museums, cultural events, as their true selves, relearning each other without pretense. Eliza was surprised to discover that the Michael she had known in the park was fundamentally the same person as the polished CEO. The core of him, his values, his humor, his perspective on life remained consistent. One evening, after a symphony performance, they walked along the riverfront where they had once held hands. "I have a confession," Eliza said suddenly. Michael tensed. "What is it?" "I've been doing some undercover work of my own. Not as dramatically as you, but I visited the homeless shelter where you volunteered. I talked to the people there." Oh, Michael's voice was carefully neutral. "They told me you've been supporting that place for years. That even before your experiment you spent time there regularly, knew people by name, followed up on their situations." She looked up at him. "Why didn't you tell me that?" Michael shrugged. "It didn't seem relevant to my deception." "But don't you see? It is relevant. It tells me that your concern for others wasn't part of some temporary role you were playing. It's who you are." "Does that change anything?" he asked softly. Eliza stopped walking to face him. "It changes everything. The man I fell for in the park, he was real. Different circumstances, same heart." For the first time since their confrontation, Michael reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," Eliza said, "we start over, properly, as ourselves." Michael smiled, relief washing over his features. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, Eliza and Michael stood together at the opening of the Urban Dignity Center, a joint venture between their companies that combined innovative housing solutions with comprehensive support services for unhoused individuals. As cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Eliza squeezed Michael's hand. "Ready for this?" "As long as we're doing it together," he replied. Stepping to the microphones, they told their story, an edited version, of course, but one that emphasized how their shared experiences had inspired this project. They spoke about seeing beyond circumstances to the humanity in each person, about second chances and authentic connections. Sometimes, Eliza told the crowd, you have to lose sight of what you have to appreciate what truly matters. For us, that was finding someone who saw past the wealth and status to the person beneath. Michael nodded. "We've learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the quality of our connections and the impact we can have on others' lives." Later that night, in the privacy of Eliza's penthouse, they stood at the windows overlooking the park where they had first met. "Do you ever miss him?" Eliza asked. "The homeless man I fell in love with." Michael wrapped his arms around her from behind. "He's still here, just with better hygiene and access to his bank accounts." Eliza laughed, leaning back against him. "I've been thinking." Oh, should I be worried?" "Maybe. What would you think about taking some time away? Not as a homeless man or a tech CEO, just as us, somewhere nobody knows our names or net worths." "Are you suggesting we run away together, MS?" Harrington, Michael teased. "More like a sabbatical. A real one this time, to remember what matters beyond the boardrooms and balance sheets." Michael turned her to face him. "I think it sounds perfect. After all, the greatest adventure I ever had started when I walked away from everything I thought defined me. And found me instead, Eliza finished, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. And found you instead, he agreed. Sometimes life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, even when we're looking in all the wrong places. For Eliza and Michael, two people isolated by success and wealth, it took stripping away the external trappings of status to find what they truly sought: genuine connection. Their journey reminds us that authenticity can be both the hardest thing to offer and the most precious gift we can give. Michael's deception, born from a desire to be seen for himself rather than his wealth, nearly cost him the very thing he sought. And Eliza, trapped in her own golden cage of success, had to learn that true connection requires vulnerability and forgiveness. In a world that often values the superficial appearances, status, financial worth, their story challenges us to look deeper, to see people for who they truly are beneath the labels society assigns them. 2 years after the opening of the Urban Dignity Center, Eliza and Michael were married in a private ceremony in the park where they first met. They have since expanded their initiative to cities across the country, creating spaces where people of all backgrounds can find not just shelter, but dignity and opportunity. They still take regular sabbaticals together, weeks where they travel anonymously, reconnecting with each other and the world outside their privilege. These journeys keep them grounded, reminding them of the lessons they learned during those first weeks in the park. The greatest irony, Michael once said in a rare interview, is that I had to pretend to be someone else to become more authentically myself. Eliza nodded beside him, and I had to lose trust to learn how to truly trust again. Their story teaches us that love doesn't see bank accounts or business portfolios. It sees the heart, the character, the soul of a person. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest obstacles to happiness are the walls we build ourselves, walls of expectation, of judgment, of fear. So the next time you pass someone on the street, remember that appearances can be deceiving. The homeless man might be a CEO in disguise, or he might simply be a human being worthy of the same dignity and respect as anyone else. Either way, the connection you forge by seeing beyond the surface could change both your lives in ways you never imagined.